So once I have my contour lines created from my topography model, I want to go ahead and make this into a 2D drawing. But before we do that, I'm going to split things up onto some layers so that later on when we go back to reconstruct this, it makes things a little bit easier. So if we go into our side view and we drag a window over, I'm going to just change this to the layers for the actual layers that they are in the model. So this will make things a lot easier later on. So if you're ever going to do this, I would suggest making sure you keep really good track of what is on which layer so that you know where it actually goes when you go to reconstruct things. So if it's something like a mountain or a hill, it becomes really easy. But if it's anything more complicated where you have a bunch of dips and it sort of dives down in different places and peaks are different heights and things like that, it makes it really difficult if you don't know which curves are on which layer. So again, we're dragging to the right. That'll select everything that it catches fully. Then we'll right click and do a change object layer. And we're almost done here. So we have 13 layers that we're going to be creating here. Okay, so once that's done, we can look at our perspective. So we want to now flatten this. So there's an obvious command that we could do here, which is make 2D. But the one I'm going to show you here is called project to C plane. So if I do project to C plane, and it's asking me if I want to delete my input object. So I'm going to click no here. And then once the command is complete, without clicking off of anything, just grab the geometry and move it off. So you can see that we now have a copy. And what that copy is that's going to be a totally two-dimensional drawing of these lines that you've created. So if you're going to if you need to add topography or contour lines to your plans or something like that, this is a really good way to do it. Grab the contours, bring them over off to the side, do a project to C plane or a make 2D to make those totally flat for your drawing. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this off just so that we're not working entirely on that one. So we'll copy this. And now what I'm going to do is I can select objects by layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and hide these for now. And I'm going to only work on this little guy here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab everything except the top layer. I'm going to grab from layer 1 all the way down to layer 12. And I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to do select all. Whoops, not select all. I'm going to right click and do select objects. So that'll select everything except these top 2 points. So again, if we show this quick, we can see the reason it's not selecting those 2 points is because those 2 are actually my peaks. So I'm going to hide these again, and I'm going to do select objects. And then what I'm going to do with those is I'm just going to go ahead and move those down by 1/2 inch. And then what I'm going to do is now I'm going to select everything from 1 through 11, select objects, and I'm going to move those down. Then you can actually hold control and just deselect the layer, select objects, and we're going to move those down. You have to click off every time, then control here, right click, select objects, move down. And we're going to keep doing that all the way until we get to the bottom. And then just the objects on this layer and move that down. So now if we go ahead and do show, we'll see that this model actually matches this model totally. So that's how you would basically take your two-dimensional drawing and you would make it back into the three-dimensional drawing. So now if we wanted to construct this into a full 3D model that simulates this type of geometry, what we're going to need to do is we need to take basically, this is our bottommost layer. So we're going to need to make a rectangle around that to make basically a base plane for this. So how would we go about doing that when we don't have an actual, basically we don't have any corner anchor points here. So we're not really sure how big our site actually is. So if we highlight all of this and we do a bounding box, so the command there is bounding box. And we're going to change our output. We're just going to do curves for now and then click enter. So we can see that that's going to basically make an XYZ box that contains this within the entire boundary. And what we know about this bottommost curve is that it's going to be on the same plane as this contour line. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw a rectangle here. And then if I just delete this real quick, I'm going to change this to layer 1. And then I'm going to do a copy. And then you see there's an option here for vertical. So if we click vertical equals yes, and then I click this and I do 0.5, that will copy it exactly ½ an inch vertically. And then what I can do is I can just keep copying these off of the ones below them until I get all the way to the top. And here, so we see I'm totally at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change the layers of all these guys to the layers that they actually go on. So right click, change object layer. Okay, good. So I'm going to just hide some of these layers so we can show the work that we're doing. So if we look at, this is sort of going to serve as our key over here. So if we look at this, what we see is we have a full rectangle, and then we just have a little segment cut out of it. So I'm going to show you, so we'll basically select this curve and do a trim, and we'll trim that piece out, and then we're going to do a join here. And then if we do an extrude curve, we're going to want to extrude 0.5 so we can see we're good there. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn layer 2 on, and you can see we're going to do pretty much the same thing here. So if we trim that out, we join that, and then we do an extrude by ½ inch. You're going to see we're starting to build out this model roughly here. So what I want to do is I actually want to go through and do this for each layer. So I'm just going to do, before I do all of my extrusions, I'm going to want to do all of these exterior curves. And you can go through and hide these sort of as you're going, so it makes it a little bit easier to see. And you can just drag a window over the whole thing and do a join. And you can see that I'm not doing anything with these circles because those are actually going to then be holes in my topography at those layers. So you can see here now the hole hits the edge. So we're going to go through and do this for each layer that we have. So here, if we take a look at what's going on, so I'm going to go ahead and extrude some of the curves that are below this. So if we select all of them that are on this layer and we do an extrude, whoops. So let's hide these first. Then we can select these objects. We can do an extrude. So we can see what's starting to happen here is that we're roughly approximating this model with a stepped model. So then what we need to be careful with here is what we're actually making the positive. So it looks like we did it right here. So we're going to go ahead and extrude this by 0.5. And then you can see here what we're going to need to start doing is trimming out a slightly different area. So when we look at this, you can see that we actually trimmed out the wrong area here. So if we did it wrong, it's okay. So we're gonna just do a select. We'll do a select poly surface. We're just gonna go ahead and hide these. So you can see that we did this layer totally wrong. So we're just gonna grab these curves that are on the edges, and we'll just delete those. So we're good there. And then if we mess something up here, we can just drag a box, and then we can do a move vertical, and we can move it up to this point. So don't worry if you mess some of it up. So I'm gonna just basically skip ahead here. If we do a show, you can see this is what we're looking at. So this is sort of in cooking show style. This is the next thing that we're going to look at. So this is would be that whole model. So you can see if we're gonna go through and extrude all of these by 0.5, so you can see we're going to get pretty big steps. So the finer resolution that you have between these lines, the better steps you're going to get. So if we were to do something like grab this and do a contour from here to here, and we did something like a 1/16 of an inch, you can see how fine the resolution would become of our step model. So this would show a really, really good approximation of this, whereas this becomes a really, really chunky approximation. So that usually has to do with the type of material you're using. If you're using something like a CNC machine, it has to do with the amount of time it would take to mill the file. So that's the basic approach that you would take to make a step model. And if you were making it from something that was already a solid to begin with, you would obviously have an easier go of it with something like this, where you wouldn't have to go through and do these rectangles and actually close off all of the curves that you want to extrude. So the next tutorial will go over basically how to take this information and turn it back into a smooth sort of profile here. And then from there, we'll go into how to Boolean something like a building out of this object.